Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Perkenalkan, nama saya Rahayu Frita Windani, NPM 213510724. Di sini saya akan mempelajari materi pertemuan 10 yaitu tentang Node.js Cross. Baiklah.
It's been about 3 years since the last Node.js crash course, and I'll go over what I prefer. It's more modern. Now, when it comes to the core modules that Node includes, I think the HTTP module is one of the most important to kind of understand when you're getting started. And this is what allows you to create a server and accept requests and give responses. So a big part of this tutorial will be using the HTTP module. Now, in real life, like I said earlier, you'd probably use something like Express, which is a web framework that makes things much easier. And I'm also going to be revamping my Express crash course as well. But Express uses or sits on top of the HTTP. So this is the official Node.js website, nodejs.org. And as far as installation goes, it's very simple. If you're on Windows or Mac, you can just simply go to the site, click download the LTS, which is the long-term support version. You can download the absolute latest version if you want. There might be some extra features there, but I usually suggest using the LTS. And then you can just run that file. I already have it installed in this machine, so I'm not going to run it, but it's just like any other installer. Just go through it, and then Node should be installed. Now, if you're on Mac, you can also use Homebrew, and of course, if you're on Linux, you can use your, whatever the package manager for your distro is, and get it installed that way. And then you just want to open up a terminal or a command line prompt and just do node -- version, and that will show you the version that's installed. And Node.js comes with NPM, which is the Node Package Manager, which you can use to install third-party packages, and you can just make sure that that's installed as well. Now, Node.js does come with a REPL, which stands for Read Eval Print Loop, and it's basically just a command line environment to run JavaScript, and you can start that by just typing node and then enter. So from here, I can type in any JavaScript that I want. Now, you're probably not going to use this much, but it is a nice way to kind of test out code and just experiment with JavaScript and not have to do it through a file, through the browser or anything like that. So I'll just give you some examples. We can do a console.log. And obviously, when you're doing front-end JavaScript, the console pertains to the console in the browser. This pertains to the terminal. So if we do console log hello world and run that, it's going to just spit it out to the terminal, to the console, and undefined just means that there's nothing being returned from this line. Now you can also create variables, like we can say name John, and obviously I get undefined because that doesn't actually return anything. If I do a console.log of the variable of name, then I should see John. You can also create functions, like we use a one-line arrow function here called greet, and we'll just return, let's just return, we can put some backticks in here and say hello, and then put our name variable, and then we can call that function, and we get hello John. All right, so like I said, you're probably not going to use this much, but it is there for you to test out code or whatever you want. So you can just do Control or Command C to get out of that. Now from here, I just want to create a folder to work in. You can either use your Explorer or File Manager, or you can use the terminal and just do make directory. And I'm going to call this Node.js-crash-2024. Okay, and then I'm just going to CD into that folder. And then from there, I'm going to open my text editor with code . If you're not using VS Code, just open that folder up in whatever editor you're using. So close that, and now I'm just going to use the integrated terminal for any commands that I want to run. Now, 99% of the time, the first thing you're going to do when you're starting a new Node.js project is create a package.json file. So we can do that by using an npm command. So in the terminal, we can say npm init. And there's going to be some questions asked, and if you wanted to skip those questions, you could just add -y, but I'm going to go through those just so you can see what they are. So the package name, whatever's in parentheses, is the default, so you can just hit enter to accept that. Version, description, I'm just going to say Node.js crash course code, And then the entry point, which is like your main file, index.js, that's fine. And then you can just enter through this stuff. If you want, you can put your own name, and then for license, I usually put MIT. And then enter, and that will create a package.json file for you. So you never have to create this manually. And this has, basically the stuff that we just answered. And then it also has scripts. So basically you can create what are called NPM scripts to do certain things like start your server, stop it, run tests, all kinds of stuff. And I'll get more into that a little later. So now that we have a package.json file, the next thing you would usually do is create an entry point, which is your main file, the file you're going to run. Usually when dealing with Node.js, or any language really, you're going to have a project structure with files and folders, and usually you have one entry point, and the other stuff is just imported into other files. So let's create a file. I'm going to call it index.js, and you might see this as app.js or server.js. I usually like to use index. Now from here, we can just type JavaScript. So I can do a console log. Let's just say hello world. Now, since we have Node.js installed in this machine, I can run this file from my terminal by saying node and then the name of the file, which is index.js. Make sure you're in the correct directory, and you'll see hello world printed to the console. And you don't even have to do the .js. We could just do index, which is the name of the file, and then that runs it as well. Okay, and you can put any JavaScript that you want in here. Okay, now there are some differences. So for instance, when you're in the browser environment, and I'm assuming that a lot of you are coming from the front end, so in the browser you have this window object, right? If I were to run it, you'll see I get an error. It says window is not defined. That's because there's no browser, so there is no window object. Now there is something called global, which is similar, but it obviously doesn't represent a browser window. It represents just the global object, and you can see that there's a bunch of stuff on this as well, such as set timeout, set interval. These are actually not part of JavaScript. They're part of the web API in the browser, but they're also available in Node.js because of this global object. All right, now there's also not a document object, so there's no DOM, right, because there's no document. The document pertains to the browser and its environment, so that's not available, but there is a process object. So that pertains to the current process that's being run. So you can see there's a bunch of stuff on here that you can get as well. You can get environment variables, things like that. And I'll talk more about the process later. All right, so yeah, so those are basically, it's just the environment is different, but as far as the JavaScript language goes, it's all the same. And that's what's great about building full stack when you're using like React or Vue or anything like that. You're writing the same language on the front end as you are on the back end, which is nice, rather than doing JavaScript on the front end and then Python or PHP or something on the back end, which is also fine, but I like to have it all in one. Now I want to talk about modules. So usually, like I said, you'll have a structure of files. So let's go ahead and create a utils.js file. And let's say that this is just a file that has random functions that we want to use around our site. So I'll create a function. Let's call this generate random number. And that's exactly what it is. So we're going to round by 100. And then now I do native first with export and then utils. And with CommonJS, we don't have to do the .js at the end.